Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie No Other Land, 2024, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. There are some stories that aren't built in writing rooms or fabricated in the comfort of air-conditioned studios. Some are shaped by the dirt under fingernails, by the hiss of distant conflict, and by the relentless heartbeat of people who refuse to forget where they come from. No Other Land, released in 2024, isn't just a documentary, it's a cinematic wound. Raw, pulsing, and defiant in its quiet power. Co-directed by Basel Adra, Yuval Abraham, Hamdan Ballal, and Rachel Szor, it's not a story that tries to look away. It stares directly into the storm, hands steady on the camera, eyes fixed on the truth. Set in the occupied West Bank, this film follows the forced displacement of Palestinian residents in the village of Sefer Yatta, their lives pressed under the weight of military bulldozers and legal erasure. But more than that, it unspools the unlikely friendship between two young men on opposite sides of a barricade. Basel, a Palestinian activist and journalist from the village itself, and Yuval, an Israeli journalist who stands beside him. They document. They question. They refuse to accept silence. From the opening frames, No Other Land does something extraordinary. It doesn't explain itself in a voiceover. There's no omniscient narrator. There is no one to hold your hand. What we get instead is a tapestry of fragments. Voices trembling beneath drone shots of shattered homes, wind hissing over the stones of a demolished classroom, and children sitting on rubble where a house used to be. The camera is close. Not polished. Not detached. You can hear the footfalls of those being chased. You can see the dust still hanging in the air from a collapsed roof. It's cinema that feels like memory, unfiltered and urgently alive. As the story unfolds, we witness the escalation of demolition orders against the Palestinian communities living in the South Hebron Hills. Families are given minutes to leave their homes. Soldiers arrive with maps, plans, the impassive authority of uniforms. A classroom is destroyed. A goat pen becomes a legal battleground. The land, ancient, sacred, ancestral, is redrawn on paper but never truly erased in the hearts of those who've called it home for generations. And through all this, we follow Basel. He isn't an actor. He's a son. A neighbor. A voice rising in protest with a camera slung over his shoulder. Basel doesn't simply narrate the events, he lives them. He records his home being destroyed. His father confronting soldiers. The quiet heartbreak of his mother folding a shirt with nowhere left to place it. In every frame he's in, Basel becomes a bridge, between the viewer and the lived reality, between despair and resilience. Yuval's presence is equally striking. An Israeli who chooses to stand against the actions of his own government, he's not portrayed as a savior, but as someone learning to listen, really listen. The two men argue, cry, film side by side. Their friendship is cautious, tender, necessary. It defies propaganda. It defies politics. And in doing so, it reveals one of the film's most powerful undercurrents, the humanity that still flickers beneath decades of division. There's a moment, brief, almost too soft to catch, where Yuval films Basel as he walks through the remnants of his home. They don't speak. But the silence says more than any interview could. There's grief there. And rage. And also, an unspoken promise to not let the world look away. The documentary doesn't move linearly. It fragments itself, reflecting the disjointed way trauma often lives in the mind. One day we're watching a village wedding. The next, we're watching bulldozers crush the same road the bride danced down. The rhythm of the film echoes the instability of life under occupation. Moments of beauty swallowed by sudden violence, joy marked by a constant undercurrent of what could be taken away. And yet, this isn't a film about giving up. No Other Land thrums with resistance. Not the kind born of vengeance, but of preservation. Children laugh while standing on demolished walls. A man insists on planting olive trees where the military says no growth is allowed. Families gather not just to mourn but to rebuild, again and again. There is no narration telling you how to feel. Just people living in defiance of those who want their existence reduced to statistics. Visually, the film shifts between handheld immediacy and poetic stillness. At times, the camera shakes, struggling to keep up with a protest erupting into chaos. Other times, it rests on a sunset over a crumbling hillside, holding the shot long enough to let the ache settle in. The landscape itself becomes a character, scarred, beautiful, watching. The sound design, minimal and haunting, allows the real audio, shouts, cries, silence, to carry the emotional weight. It doesn't manipulate. It lets truth echo. In one particularly striking scene, we watch as the Israeli court delivers its ruling, granting the military authority to evict entire communities from what they now deem a firing zone. The words are dry, bureaucratic. But we cut to Basel, standing outside the courtroom, hands clenched. They don't just want the land, he says quietly. They want us to disappear. And yet, there he stands. Camera still rolling. Voice unshaken. The film's final act doesn't offer resolution. There is no court victory. No magic reversal of the injustices we've witnessed. Instead, there's a return. To the dust. To the cracked earth. To the people still sweeping the floors of tents they now call home. And that, in its quiet devastation, is perhaps the most powerful statement the film makes. Survival is resistance. Memory is defiance. Telling the story is an act of refusal. No other land isn't comfortable to watch. It isn't meant to be. But it is necessary. In an age where footage of suffering can be scrolled past in seconds, this film demands presence. It demands you stay. Look. Feel. Not just for the Palestinian villagers of Masafer Yatta, but for the idea that some stories must be told, even if the world isn't ready to hear them. And yet, the film does something else too, something even braver. It allows space for empathy in the most unexpected places. Yuval's internal struggle. His confrontation with his own history, his own government's decisions. The friction between him and Basel isn't brushed away. It's shown. Carefully. Painfully. Their alliance isn't clean. But it's real. It's fragile and brave and soaked in mutual understanding that's still growing. And that messiness is where the real power lies. Because peace, real peace, isn't built in speeches. It's built in the spaces where two people agree to stand together despite everything that says they shouldn't. By the end of the film, you don't walk away with answers. You walk away with questions. With echoes. With the image of a tree standing in the rubble. With Basel's camera still recording. With Yuval's voice, shaky but firm, saying, "We have to show this. People have to see. And people will see." Because no other land doesn't just sit in your memory. It lives there. A story carved from stone and silence and shouted truths. A reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary films aren't the ones with the biggest budgets or the most elaborate effects. Sometimes they're made with shaking hands, shared pain, and a camera that refuses to blink. This is not a movie you watch. This is a movie you witness. And once you have, you won't be able to forget it. It opens not with a grand overture, but with something smaller. Softer. Dust carried on the wind across the Judean hills. A horizon jagged with dry stone and stubborn olive trees. There are no sweeping shots of capitals, no names scrolling across the screen. Just a road, winding, fractured, and a voice behind the camera saying, "This is my home." And soon it might not be. That voice belongs to Basel Adra. And through his eyes, the land rises, not as a backdrop, but as a living character. No other land doesn't begin like most documentaries. It doesn't explain. It doesn't pause to define. It shows. And what it shows is as intimate as it is incendiary. a place where the earth itself is contested, where identity is tethered to soil, and where home is a word heavy with both belonging and danger. We first meet Basel walking the broken paths of Sefer Yatta, a cluster of Palestinian villages scattered across the South Hebron hills. His camera is steady, his voice deliberate. This is not just a filming project for him, it is an act of survival, of memory. His family has lived here for generations, in homes made of stone and scrap, clinging to a landscape that predates borders. But that landscape is changing, encroaching. Early scenes ease us into daily life. Children chase goats between rock walls. A grandmother kneads dough under a metal roof. Boys build kites from plastic and driftwood. The camera lingers, not out of pity, but respect. These are not symbols. These are lives. But the piece, if it can be called that, is brittle. A distant sound. Engines. Boots on gravel. Military jeeps crawl down the dirt road like beetles with no faces. Inside the homes, everyone knows what it means. They don't scream. They prepare. Documents are grabbed. Water bottles filled. A father instructs his son to film everything. And just like that, the rhythm shifts. Demolition orders, paper-thin but heavy with power, are presented. In Hebrew, unreadable to most of the villagers. Soldiers, young, stone-faced, stand in formation as bulldozers advance. The camera doesn't cut away. It watches. A roof caves. A wall topples. A woman cries out, not dramatically, but quietly, like someone watching a memory die. It's here that Yuval Abraham enters the frame. He's not introduced with fanfare. He doesn't explain himself. He's simply there. An Israeli journalist, fair-haired and wide-eyed, filming beside Basel. Their presence together feels jarring at first. Two men from opposite sides of a divide, capturing the same moment through very different lenses. Their friendship isn't romanticized. It's cautious. Sometimes tense. But it's clear, they trust each other. Together, they document. The footage they collect becomes a lifeline. Basel uploads videos to social media. Yuval writes articles, pens op-eds, speaks into microphones. But what becomes painfully clear is that truth, here, doesn't always move the needle. Politicians dismiss their work. Courts rule against the villagers. And each morning brings the threat of another jeep. The first act of the film doesn't unfold through interviews or expert panels. It moves like a personal diary. Days are marked by destruction, by protests, by moments of fleeting, fragile joy. There's a scene where Basel helps his mother sweep the floor of their newly rebuilt home, a shelter assembled in the same place the army destroyed just weeks prior. He jokes with her. They laugh. But behind the laughter is exhaustion. The weight of doing the same thing over and over again, knowing it could be undone at any moment. Yuval, too, begins to fray. In one particularly powerful moment, he speaks to the camera, not as a journalist, but as a man unraveling. I grew up thinking I was on the good side, he says. That we were protecting something. But what are we protecting when we do this? His hands shake. His eyes dart off-screen. And for a second, the line between witness and participant blurs. This is one of the film's quiet triumphs. It refuses easy binaries. It doesn't paint Israelis as villains and Palestinians as victims. It paints people. Frightened, furious, tired, stubborn, real. Even the soldiers, faceless at first, eventually emerge with their own cracks. One is shown pacing nervously before a demolition. Another avoids eye contact with a boy filming him. They are cogs in a machine they did not build. The plot deepens when the Israeli government designates a swath of Sefer Yatta as Firing Zone 918, a military training area. The classification, on paper, renders the villages illegal. But in practice, it tears through generations of history. Court battles ensue. Lawyers argue over maps and decades-old aerial photos. But the villagers are not waiting for justice. They are too busy rebuilding what was lost. As tensions rise, so do the stakes. A classroom is torn down. A well is filled with concrete. An elderly man has a seizure during a protest. The air thickens with smoke and disbelief. And yet, amid the chaos, life stubbornly persists. A girl braids her sister's hair on a rooftop. A boy fixes the tire on his bike. The sun still rises over the hills. Yuval and Basel begin to share more than footage. They share frustration, doubt, hope. They question whether anything they're doing is making a difference. But when one of Basel's videos goes viral, showing soldiers pushing a woman to the ground during a demolition, the world briefly looks in. Journalists arrive. Statements are made. For a moment, it feels like something might change. But the moment passes. One of the most harrowing scenes comes when a protest turns violent. Tear gas fills the frame. The camera stumbles. Shouts blur. Basel coughs into his sleeve, blood running from his forehead. Yuval is shoved to the ground, shouting, "We're press! We're press!" But the badges mean little. In this place, lines don't hold. Cameras are weapons. Truth is dangerous. The following day, Basel returns to what's left of his home. Yuval films in silence. There is no dialogue. Just wind and the sound of shoes crunching on glass. Basel picks up a photograph, charred at the edges. He doesn't say anything. He just holds it. The scene lingers. And then the rhythm slows again. A wedding takes place in one of the tents. Laughter. Music. Men clap and dance. The women ululate. It's not defiance exactly, but something older. Something deeper. A refusal to let despair have the last word. Yuval joins the circle, uncertain at first, then smiling. The camera spins. For once, the film breathes. But even here, joy is edged with fear. Basel, in voiceover, speaks softly. "This is the last place I belong. There is no other land. Not for us." It's not a plea. It's a fact. And it sets the tone for what's to come. Because no other land doesn't build toward resolution. It builds toward understanding. By this point, the viewer is no longer just watching events unfold. They are inside them. The dust has settled in your lungs. The tension has crawled into your chest. You understand, perhaps for the first time, that this story isn't rare. It isn't an anomaly. It's everyday life for those who live here. The friendship between Yuval and Basel, once tentative, now feels essential. It's not idealized. It's work. Constant negotiation. But it's real. And in a world built on walls, even that is revolutionary. As the final frames of this section fade to black, we're left not with resolution, but with a question. What do you do when your home is taken from you in plain sight? When you have no army, no government, only a camera and your own voice? For Basel, the answer is simple. You keep filming. You keep showing the world. Because silence, in a place like this, is just another kind of violence. The air hangs heavier now. Everything feels more brittle, like the film itself is holding its breath. Where earlier scenes carried the crackle of disruption, now there is something different, something more final, etched into the lines of every face, folded into the long silences that settle between the voices. The earth hasn't changed. The hills still roll gently in the distance. The sky still bruises itself with dusk. But the people, they're tired in a new way. Basel's voice returns, quieter than before. Not broken, but changed. This isn't just documentation anymore. It's testimony. And now, the camera doesn't just capture the present. It chases memory. Footage rolls of spaces that no longer exist, the goat pen his father built with his bare hands, the olive trees his mother watered every day for a year, the corner of a school where children used to write letters they never had time to send. The military presence has intensified. Jeeps come more often. Drones hover longer. The court's decision has been made. The Supreme Court of Israel has ruled. Sefer Yatta is now officially designated as a military firing zone. More than 1,000 residents are ordered to leave. The land, by legal decree, belongs not to the people who live on it, but to the state for use as a training ground. There is no explosion. No sudden collapse. Just a slow erosion of hope. Basel walks through what used to be a home. Walls are missing. Roof gone. A mattress lies buried under stones and splintered beams. His father sits beside it, silent. There are no tears. Just dust and breath and a long stare into the camera that dares you to look away. But this isn't the end. Because if anything defines this story, it's the refusal to stop telling it. Yuval is there. Still filming. Still writing. But something is shifting in him too. His voiceover begins to appear, sharing his internal conflict in halting sentences. There's no way to stand here and not feel it, he says, watching a demolition from behind a line of soldiers. I grew up being told this was necessary. Security. Protection. But this is erasure. Their friendship, once cautious, begins to deepen in its discomfort. They argue. They speak over one another. There's a rawness now. One night, they sit under a makeshift tarp with others from the village. Tea boils. Conversation turns heated. Yuval says, maybe if more people knew, if we could just show them. And Basel cuts in, we've been showing them for 20 years. Where are they? Silence follows. But then someone passes a cup of tea. The fire crackles. And the conversation shifts to music, to food, to what tomorrow might look like. Because even here, even now, the simple rituals of survival persist. And that becomes the resistance. The film lingers longer now. Scenes stretch. A woman unrolls a carpet in the dirt, then kneels to pray. A boy builds a model airplane from scraps of metal and string. A grandmother, face carved like the rock she stands on, teaches her granddaughter to bake bread in a stone oven that barely survived the last raid. These aren't pauses. They are statements. Every act of normalcy, every moment of joy, is its own form of protest. And then comes a moment that changes everything. A family, Basil's cousins, receive a final order. Their home is to be demolished within the hour. No appeal. No warning. The military arrives with overwhelming force. Not one, not two, but dozens of soldiers. Drones circle. Journalists gather. Yuval and Basel stand shoulder to shoulder, filming, documenting, watching. A man shouts, "This is our land. You can't take it." A soldier replies, "We're just following orders." The bulldozer roars to life. And then, amid the chaos, a sudden twist. Yuval crosses the line. He steps in front of the machine, hands raised. Not with bravado. With desperation. A soldier shouts, "There's pushing." Basel drops his camera, runs forward, pulls Yuval back. For a moment, everything unravels. But then the dust settles. The home is gone. That night, the two men speak in fragments. "You could have been arrested," Basel says. "I should have been," Yuval replies. "What difference would it make?" Yuval doesn't answer. The next day, they're back. Filming. Always filming. Because the story doesn't pause for grief. It doesn't pause for hope either. It just keeps going. And the film goes with it now. The narrative moves faster. Not because the events are more dramatic, but because the world around them begins to close in. International attention has come and gone. Statements have been made. Reports written. But the demolitions continue. Basil's footage is picked up by news outlets. Yuval's articles go viral in certain circles. But on the ground, nothing changes. The land continues to shrink. One of the most gut-wrenching sequences comes in near silence. The camera follows Basel as he returns to a site where 3 homes were demolished that morning. He walks slowly, carefully. He picks up a child's shoe, a spoon, a plastic cup. He places them in a box. He doesn't speak, not even when the camera turns on him. Behind him, the sun is setting. The screen holds the shot for a long time, then fades to black. But even as the physical structures fall, something unexpected rises. Yuval begins speaking in Hebrew to his own community, on camera, in protests, at panels. He brings Basel's footage to Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem. He's met with skepticism, even hostility. But he doesn't stop. "I can't undo what's happening," he says. "But I can refuse to be silent." And in a powerful, layered moment, Basel does something similar. He travels to Europe for a film screening. It's a small venue, a crowd of students and activists. He shows the footage. He answers their questions. And when someone asks, "What do you want us to do?" he replies, "Remember what you saw. Then tell someone else." The film circles back one final time to Sefer Yatta. Now, tents rise where homes once stood. Water must be brought from farther away. The air is thinner, somehow. But the people remain. A teacher conducts a class under a tree. A man repairs a generator. Children laugh as they chase each other barefoot across the rocky soil. Basel looks into the camera one last time. "We are not leaving. We never will. This is our land. There is no other." It's not a speech. It's not anger. It's truth. And with that, no other land closes, not on resolution, but on presence. No sweeping music. No credits rolling over victory. Just the sound of wind. The hills. The heartbeat of a land that refuses to forget its name. And a camera that is still recording. In no other land, there are no fictional characters. No scripted lines. No costume changes or plot devices. What we see are people, real, breathing, trembling people, standing in the trembling reality of their lives. And yet, through the eye of the camera, they become something more. Their presence, their silences, their glances into the lens carry the weight of whole histories. As the documentary unfolds, the individuals at its heart evolve with each frame, each demolition, each impossible choice. What emerges is not just a story of displacement, but of deeply human character arcs shaped by fire and dust, friendship and fracture. At the center stands Basel Adra, not as a symbol, but as a son of the soil, quiet, observant, unwavering. He doesn't enter the film with spectacle. He doesn't ask for pity. He documents. His camera is not just an instrument of resistance, it is an extension of himself. From the very beginning, Basel establishes his position without needing to explain it. This is his land. This is his village. These are his people. And if their stories are buried under rubble, he will dig them out again with film and with memory. Basel's strength is not loud. It doesn't flash or perform. It lives in the way he steadies the camera as bulldozers arrive, in how he consoles his mother while filming the ruins of their home, in the way he refuses to blink even as soldiers raise their weapons. Through his lens, we come to see how trauma does not always break a person. Sometimes it refines them. Basel becomes a vessel for his community's resilience. He absorbs grief and outrage, but never lets it calcify into hatred. Yet he is not stoic in the traditional sense. His emotion is there, quiet, yes, but undeniable. When he watches soldiers shatter the classroom he once studied in, when he sifts through the rubble for a photograph, when he walks his friend through the skeleton of a home that no longer exists, his heartbreak is raw. But it's never theatrical. And perhaps that's what makes him unforgettable. He's not performing for the camera. He is the camera. And we, the audience, are witnesses because he allows us to be. Then there is Yuval Abraham. If Basel is the grounded anchor, Yuval is the echo of internal reckoning. An Israeli journalist filming alongside Basel, Yuval enters the narrative not as a hero, but as a question. What does it mean to stand beside someone your government is trying to erase? What does it cost to challenge the foundations of your own identity? Yuval begins as an observer, sharp-eyed and soft-spoken. But observation is not neutrality, and the deeper he goes, the more the weight of what he sees begins to change him. He is a man torn between truth and tradition, between what he was taught and what he is now witnessing through his own lens. He does not hide his discomfort. He names it. He struggles with it. And in doing so, he becomes perhaps the most emotionally complex presence in the film. There are moments where Yuval's voiceover reveals a man walking a tightrope between complicity and courage. He acknowledges his place in the power structure. He admits to his privilege. And yet, rather than flee from it, he leans in. He films. He writes. He speaks out. Even when it costs him relationships, safety, reputation. Yuval is not trying to fix anything. He is trying to understand. And in that trying, he becomes part of the very fabric of the story he set out to document. The dynamic between Basel and Yuval is the film's emotional spine. Their relationship is not sanitized or idealized. It is real, marked by tension, misunderstanding, and moments of near collapse. But also by laughter and deep, shared silence. When they argue, it is not political, it is personal. When they collaborate, it is not for optics, it is because they must. Their friendship defies expectations not by being perfect, but by being true. There's a scene where the two sit side by side, reviewing footage after a demolition. The screen reflects off their faces, their expressions etched with something deeper than sorrow. Exhaustion. Disillusionment. A flicker of something like hope. It is in moments like these that their bond transcends the frame. They are not on opposite sides. They are on the same cliff, holding each other steady as the ground shifts beneath them. Beyond these two central figures, the film paints brief, aching portraits of others who flicker through the story. Basil's father, for instance, is a quiet figure, but his presence looms large. He is a man who has built and rebuilt the same home more times than he can count. A man whose strength is measured not in speeches, but in the steadiness of his hands. When soldiers arrive, he does not scream. He looks them in the eye. He points to the land beneath his feet and says, in a voice that does not waver, "This is mine." His dignity is not performative. It is ancestral. There is also Basil's mother, whose grief is shown in the smallest of gestures, a hand brushing dust from a broken photo frame, the way she arranges salvaged items on a table in a tent that now serves as their living room. Her heartbreak is not given dramatic monologue. It is captured in the lines of her face, in her silence, in her refusal to stop making tea even when there is no kitchen left to make it in. She, like so many others, carries a story written in the language of survival. Among the villagers are children, small, bright-eyed, curious even in the shadow of despair. A girl with pigtails carries a plastic chair out of a collapsed room and sits on it like a queen. A boy draws pictures of homes with crayons, carefully adding trees and windows, even when he no longer has either. These children are not statistics. They are not symbols. They are fully present in the frame, their lives unfolding in the in-between spaces, before the next raid, after the last eviction. And in their smiles, the film reminds us what is at stake. Even the soldiers, seen often as a monolith, are allowed moments of uncomfortable humanity. One refuses to look into the camera. Another seems to hesitate as he delivers a demolition order. The film does not excuse them. It does not soften the violence they enact. But it refuses to strip them of their humanity, even as they strip others of their homes. This nuance is rare and powerful. In this way, no other land builds its character study not through exposition, but through observation. No one is explained. Everyone is revealed. Through gesture, through reaction, through the way they stand, the way they speak, the way they endure. There is no villain with a name, and no hero in a cape. Just people, caught in a system larger than themselves. Some resisting, some upholding, all shaped by it. The film's genius lies in how it allows each person to speak, not always with words, but with presence. Basel, quiet but relentless. Yuval, conflicted but unwavering. The villagers, each a living reminder that history is not abstract. It lives in bodies, in breath, in broken windows and the echo of children's laughter over fallen stones. By the time the credits begin to roll, the characters stay with you, not as figures from a screen, but as people you now know, people you cannot forget. And perhaps that is the point. The laughter that bursts through tears. The absurdity of trying to sync subtitles while under curfew. The moment someone asks, "Do we have a permit for this?" and everyone laughs, because the word permit means something very different in a place where even existence is criminalized. Even the film's name, No Other Land, came about during an argument. The directors debated titles. Some wanted something poetic. Others wanted something confrontational. In the end, it was a phrase Basel had scribbled in a notebook months earlier, after filming a demolition: "There is no other land for us." It became a mantra, then a title, then a message to the world. And perhaps the strangest fact of all? It almost didn't happen. There were moments, dozens of them, when the directors thought about giving up. When the footage felt too scattered. When the danger felt too close. When the story felt too big to tell. But they didn't. They stitched it together in airport terminals and on rooftop tents, in refugee shelters and coffee shops. They edited by flashlight. They translated subtitles by hand. They whispered across borders and barriers. And in doing so, they built something no army could destroy. A record. A mirror. A cry. No Other Land is not just a documentary. It is a strange, sprawling, beautiful act of defiance. Built in fragments. Held together by will. And made unforgettable by the people who never stopped filming. There are moments in cinema when an image lingers long after the credits roll, not because it dazzles, but because it dares to remain still while the world spins madly around it. In No Other Land, these moments are not accidents. They are choices. Deeply deliberate, achingly intimate, and designed to confront the viewer with the unbearable weight of reality. Through the lens of co-directors Basel Adra, Yuval Abraham, Hamdan Ballal, and Rachel Zier, the film unfolds not as a linear narrative, but as a mosaic of memory, protest, grief, and connection. Critically, No Other Land challenges the very structure of documentary storytelling by erasing the distance between subject and creator. Basel isn't just filmed, he films. Yuval doesn't just question systems, he's inside them. The directors do not merely capture events. They are immersed in them, reacting in real time. This collapsing of the traditional boundaries between filmmaker and participant turns each scene into an act of simultaneous testimony and authorship. And in doing so, it demands a rethinking of what we expect from documentaries about conflict. One of the film's most pivotal moments, and one often discussed in critical circles, is the scene where Basel walks through the rubble of a newly demolished home, picking through debris as if sifting through fragments of identity. He doesn't cry. He doesn't scream. He simply moves, collects, folds a shirt, places it gently beside a broken photograph. Critics have pointed to this sequence as a masterclass in emotional storytelling, not because it overwhelms the viewer, but because it refuses to manipulate emotion. It trusts the audience to feel what it doesn't name. This restraint is a hallmark of the film's language. The choice not to use narration. The absence of dramatic scoring. the decision to let silence stand in for sentiment. It's a cinematic discipline that echoes the reality it portrays, the numbness that follows trauma, the quiet rituals of those who live within erasure. And yet, within that silence, the film speaks volumes. Another key moment, often highlighted in analysis, is Yuval's confrontation with his own complicity. It's subtle, a brief sequence where he looks into the camera, eyes clouded with something close to shame. "I used to believe we were protecting something," he says. "Now I don't know what we're protecting anymore." The camera doesn't cut. It holds. The discomfort is palpable. Critics have praised this as one of the most radical elements of No Other Land. Its insistence that no one, not even the Allies, gets to stay clean. There are no saviors here. Only witnesses. Some late. Some learning. But none exempt. This commitment to moral complexity sets the film apart from much of the media that surrounds the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In many narratives, the lines are drawn boldly: villain and victim, occupier and oppressed. No Other Land refuses to simplify. It shows soldiers who hesitate, activists who argue, journalists who cry. It does not soften the brutality of the occupation. But it does insist that even within systems of power, there are fractures. And within those fractures, there is humanity, conflicted, compromised, but real. One of the film's most critically discussed sequences is the scene where a court ruling is delivered. The order allows for the eviction of over 1,000 Palestinians from a safer Yatta. On paper, it is sterile. Just words. Legal language. Bureaucratic precision. But the cut to Basil's face as he hears the verdict transforms the abstract into the immediate. His expression doesn't erupt. It collapses. 1,000 memories flicker behind his eyes, and in that quiet devastation, the law is exposed not as neutral, but as weapon. Critics have drawn attention to the way the film juxtaposes this moment with images of children playing. The sequence is not random. It is deliberate, heartbreaking counterpoint. As the system reduces people to lines on a map, the children reclaim space with their laughter, their barefoot games, their chalk drawings on stone. The result is a collision of realities. One imposed, one lived. And in that collision, the film makes its most haunting argument. That displacement is not only physical. It is emotional. Generational. There's also the unforgettable scene where Yuval steps in front of a bulldozer. It lasts less than a minute. But in that minute, the entire framework of the film pivots. It's no longer just about documentation. It's about confrontation. Yuval, the journalist, the observer, becomes a line in the sand. Critics have debated this moment extensively. Was it performative? Was it effective? But the film never offers answers. It simply presents the act and its consequences. Yuval is pulled away. Basel shouts. The bulldozer advances. The house is destroyed anyway. And perhaps that's the point. Resistance doesn't always work. But the act of resistance is still sacred. The dynamic between Basel and Yuval has drawn considerable attention from scholars and reviewers alike. Their relationship defies neat categorization. It is not friendship in the traditional sense. Nor is it entirely political partnership. It is something more fragile, more necessary. A shared space carved out of grief and contradiction. Their arguments about power, responsibility, betrayal are not edited out. They are front and center. Because, as one critic put it, No Other Land is not a film about harmony. It's a film about how people learn to stand next to each other in a storm. This screening became a ritual. Whenever enough footage was gathered, they would gather to view it. Not to edit. Not to critique. Just to remember. And from these viewings came direction. A line of dialogue here. A lingering shot there. The story told them how it wanted to be shaped. And the story was always personal. There's a moment in the film where Basel is seen comforting his father after a demolition. The camera trembles. It's not framed well, but it's devastating in its sincerity. What audiences don't know is that Yuval was filming that shot with tears in his eyes. He nearly stopped recording. Basel told him later, "Don't ever stop filming. Not even for me." One particularly strange challenge came when the team tried to apply for post-production funding. Traditional grant applications required a detailed treatment of the script. But there was no script, no planned arc. They submitted a series of timestamps and blurry outlines, hoping someone would see the story hidden beneath the chaos. Most funders passed. A few didn't. Those few made the final edit possible. Editing itself was a labyrinth. Rachel Zier worked in stretches of 48-hour sessions, often pausing only when the laptop overheated or a sandstorm forced her to shut down. Footage was reviewed via WhatsApp voice notes. Scenes were cut and recut not based on runtime, but emotional clarity. "Does this feel like the truth?" was the only editorial guideline. One scene, the courtroom verdict, was nearly left out. Not because it wasn't powerful, but because the footage was nearly unusable. The audio was garbled. The lighting was terrible. But the reaction shots, Basil's eyes, Yuval's silence, the slow collapse of hope, were too vital to ignore. They rebuilt the scene from scraps. It became one of the film's most devastating moments. As the film neared completion, there was no sense of celebration. Only fear. Would anyone watch this? Would it make a difference? Would it even be allowed to screen? And then Berlinale happened. The Berlin International Film Festival was never in their sights. The submission was sent half as a dare, half as a prayer. When the acceptance email came through, Basel didn't believe it. Yuval read it 3 times. Hamdan laughed out loud. Rachel cried. Their world, the hills and tents and cables and chaos, was about to step onto a world stage. But even that was not without obstacles. Basel was almost barred from traveling. Yuval was accused by right-wing media of betrayal. Hamdan couldn't secure a visa in time for one festival and had to join via live stream. But none of it stopped the momentum. On the night of the premiere, as the credits rolled, the audience stood in silence. And then, applause, long, thunderous, echoing across the theater like a promise. In that moment, everything came full circle. A film made in the margins had carved its way into the center. And the people of Sefer Yatta, whose homes had been erased on maps, had drawn themselves back into the world, not in ink, but in image, in memory, in truth. Because No Other Land is not just a documentary. It is a handmade mirror, a testament, a survival song. And behind every shot is not just a director, but a village. Not just a camera, but a heartbeat. There is a place where the hills lean into one another, their spines broken and exposed, where stone walls crawl like veins across the dust. There is a silence that holds its breath between wind gusts, where stories hang in the air like ghosts. That place is Sefer Yatta, and in no other land it is not a backdrop. It is not scenery. It is the soul of the story. From the very first frame, the land makes itself known, not through spectacle, but through presence. It unfolds in slow pans, in aerial glides, in long unbroken shots that dare you to sit still and feel what lives in its soil. Sefer Yatta is not filmed like a tourist landscape, not romanticized with filters or score. It is rendered with a reverence so quiet, it feels sacred. The rocks are not just rocks, they are memory. The dust, not just dust, it's the ash of yesterday's home, the grit of lived struggle. What makes the setting of No Other Land so visceral is the way it breathes through the camera. The village is filmed not from a distance, but from within. We see paths that twist with no destination but survival. Corrugated metal roofs clatter in the wind. Tarps flutter, tied down with rope and hope. Nothing is pristine. Everything is real. And this rawness is intentional. It draws the viewer not into pity, but proximity. The filmmakers never attempt to sanitize the setting. Instead, they lean into its harshness, allowing the textures of life to dominate the screen. Dirt under fingernails. Cracked walls. The way a goat's hooves echo against a stone floor. All of it layered with the kind of detail that speaks not of poverty, but of permanence. These aren't makeshift villages to the people who live in them. They are home. Generations deep. And the film makes sure you understand that with every frame. Cinematographer Yuval Abraham and his co-directors knew that the land had to be more than a canvas. It had to speak. So they let it. Often, the camera pulls back to show the vast openness of the West Bank. Rolling hills spotted with olive trees, sheep grazing near ruins, a single path cutting through a valley like a wound. The visual choice here is deliberate. To convey isolation, yes, but also endurance. These hills have seen everything. The camera doesn't ask them to perform. It asks them to testify. And testify they do. But the brilliance of no other land lies not only in its exteriors. It's in the close spaces, the intimate corners, the claustrophobia of lives folded into shrinking rooms. Interiors are filmed with humility. There is no staging. Just a lamp flickering above a dinner table, a kettle whistling in a metal shack, the curve of a mother's back as she picks up fragments of a fallen home. These indoor spaces, often cramped and shadowed, offer stark contrast to the vastness outside. Inside is where grief hides, where resilience is whispered, not shouted. Light becomes its own narrative device. Sunlight floods the tents at dawn, casting long silhouettes of people rising to rebuild again. At dusk, the light becomes amber, bathing destruction in a kind of quiet beauty that hurts more than it heals. Night, when it comes, is unflinching. There are no streetlights. Just the occasional flicker of a phone screen, or the dull orange glow of a generator. The darkness is complete, intimate, and necessary. It reminds us that even when the world is not watching, life goes on. Or tries to. Weather is a silent character. Rain does not fall for drama. It falls because it must. And when it does, the tin roofs echo like war drums. The mud pools beneath boots. Wind howls through broken windows and carries away scraps of tarp. The filmmakers capture this with patience. They don't rush the storm. They let it arrive, settle, and pass. And in its wake, the villagers keep moving. Because the setting, as harsh as it is, does not permit stillness. It demands action, however small. The cinematography rarely breaks the fourth wall. But when it does, when a subject stares directly into the lens, it doesn't feel staged. It feels like a door opening. The land behind them continues to stretch out, unchanged and unyielding. These moments are never accidental. They are crafted with a kind of invisible discipline, allowing the landscape to frame the people and the people to define the space. Color grading, too, plays a role in crafting mood. The palette leans toward earthy tones, ochre, rust, sand, smoke. There is a dusty warmth that clings to every surface, a visual reminder of impermanence. But amidst the browns and grays, sudden bursts of color arrive like resistance. A child's blue shirt. A purple scarf blowing in the wind. A yellow sign written in Arabic. These colors are not incidental. They are life asserting itself. The use of drone footage in the film is perhaps one of its most striking visual elements. Not because it offers grandeur, but because it offers context. From above, the destruction becomes pattern. You see where homes used to be. Where roads once led. Where nothing is allowed to grow anymore. The drone doesn't soar for spectacle. It floats, hovers, mourns. In one shot, the camera rises slowly to reveal an entire village turned to rubble. The scale is staggering. And the silence is deafening. But where many films would lean into despair, no other land finds unexpected intimacy in its setting. There are places where life blooms. A classroom set up beneath a tree. A kitchen cobbled together in a cave. A wedding celebration in a tent, where colored lights blink against a backdrop of scorched hills. These spaces remind us that setting is not just geography. It is memory. It is identity. And in this film, it is resistance. The decision to film protests in wide shots gives them a different kind of weight. We see the bodies, the signs, the chaos, but also the terrain. The stones thrown are not props. They are part of the land itself. The roads blocked by soldiers are not just pathways, they are veins, cutting through the heart of communities. The protest is not a separate event. It is an extension of the earth. This is not just land being taken. It is life. Sound design, though minimal, roots the viewer in the setting. Dogs barking in the distance. A gate creaking open. A soldier's boots crunching on gravel. These are not added in post-production. They are captured as they happened. They are part of the world being filmed. And that world is constantly shifting. Sometimes violently. In one particularly poetic moment, a dust storm blows through the village. The screen blurs. Figures vanish into the haze. The camera doesn't cut. It stays. It waits. And slowly, silhouettes re-emerge. Children laughing. A woman pulling a blanket from the line. It's as if the land itself is testing them, and finding them still here. Every visual decision in no other land is rooted in this kind of philosophy, to let the land speak. Not to beautify it, not to mythologize it, but to bear witness to what it is and what it is being turned into. The filmmakers resist the urge to explain. They simply show. A wall built yesterday, torn down today. A home rebuilt 5 times. A tree marked for destruction but still blooming. There is an extraordinary restraint in how these elements are assembled. The editing does not rush us through space. It allows us to sit with it, to dwell, to understand that the hills of Masafer Yatta are not just topography. They are trauma. They are tenderness. They are the living archive of a people refusing to disappear. Critics have called the film's visual style Spartan, but that misses the point. No other land is not sparse. It is honest. Its cinematic elements do not decorate the narrative. They reveal it. They strip away pretense and politics until only the human and the earth remain. In doing so, the film creates something astonishing. Not just a portrait of place, but a conversation between people and the land they belong to. And as the final frames roll, sunlight pouring over ruins, voices echoing against the hills, you realize, the setting is not silent. It never was. It has been speaking all along. We just had to learn how to listen. It didn't feel like a set. There were no trailers, no craft services, no neat rows of production trucks humming behind fences. There was no soundstage where perfect lighting waited, no shout of action, echoing across empty space. Instead, there was dust. There were goats. There were cables buried in sand and tripods made from sticks when steel failed. And above all else, there was the land, quiet and tense, stretching beyond the lens like a living presence. Behind the scenes of No Other Land was not the glamorous image many associate with filmmaking. It was a test of endurance, of collaboration, of belief that the story mattered enough to fight for, even when it meant missing meals, sleep, and safety. But amidst the intensity were moments of laughter, absurdity, and the kind of human closeness that only exists when people face something larger than themselves, together. The crew was, in many ways, a small tribe. Basel Adra, Yuval Hamdan Ballal, and Rachel Zier didn't work like a traditional film unit. They were the unit, directors, cinematographers, interviewers, fixers, and subjects all at once. Each of them brought a piece of the puzzle. Basel, the eye from within; Yuval, the lens from outside; Hamdan, the grounding force between narrative and place; Rachel, the thread that wove footage into feeling, and yet, for all their roles, there were no egos. There wasn't room for them. One of the earliest surprises came with the sheer unpredictability of filming in Masafer Yatta. Days were planned around the threat of raids. A scene would be halfway captured when word would spread, soldiers were coming. Cameras would be tucked away, not to hide, but to protect. "You don't understand the value of a battery," Rachel once said, "until it becomes the only way to hold on to someone's story." To capture those stories, they filmed everywhere. In crumbling kitchens, on hilltops, in olive groves. The sun was both ally and adversary. It lit every scene naturally, beautifully, but it also scorched equipment and scorched shoulders. Basel often carried the camera on his back during hikes between villages, wrapped in a t-shirt to avoid overheating. Once, while filming during a protest under blazing midday heat, the crew realized their only water jug had cracked. Yuval, parched and dizzy, joked, "If this ends here, just make sure you get the shot." And they did. Interactions among the crew were less about direction and more about instinct. Trust was everything. When Basel raised his camera, the others followed. When Rachel paused during editing to say, "This doesn't feel right," everyone listened. There was no hierarchy. There was only urgency. And the rhythm of their bond, tempered through shared risk, meant decisions could be made silently, with a glance or a nod. But with all that seriousness came surprising pockets of joy. One day, as the crew was filming an interview with an elderly shepherd, a donkey wandered into frame and refused to leave. Every time they repositioned the camera, the donkey followed. Eventually, the shepherd shrugged and said, "Maybe he wants to be in the movie." He wasn't wrong. That donkey ended up in more footage than some of the crew. Another time, while shooting B-roll of children playing outside the ruins of a school, one kid ran up to Basel and insisted he film his parkour skills. The boy then proceeded to hop over a rock and trip, sending everyone into a fit of laughter. It wasn't a scene that made the final cut, but it was a moment that lingered, proof that even amid destruction, childhood insisted on joy. There was a day when the entire crew got stuck on a mountain after the van they were borrowing broke down. They spent hours waiting for help that never came. Eventually, Hamdan pulled out a portable speaker and played Farah's. Someone found dates and shared them around. And under the stars, surrounded by the whirring of insects and the smell of dust, they danced. "This is how we rest," Yuval said. "By remembering we're still alive." But there were darker moments, too. Filming through military raids meant bearing witness to real-time trauma, not from a distance, but from within. There was a night when Basil's cousin was arrested. The camera was rolling. There was shouting. Confusion. Children crying. The crew froze, not out of fear, but from the weight of deciding. When do you film, and when do you hold someone? They made a rule after that. If someone says, "Cut," they stop. No questions. No exceptions. Because no story is worth more than the person telling it. Technical challenges were a constant. Microphones shorted in the rain. Lenses fogged in humidity. Once, a full day of footage was lost when a memory card was crushed underfoot during a scramble to escape a clash. Rachel was devastated. But Basel just sighed and said, "There will be more stories." And there were. Editing brought its own form of intimacy. The footage, often filmed without slates or notes, had to be deciphered like a language. Rachel worked from Jerusalem, sometimes from cafes with spotty Wi-Fi, sometimes from borrowed apartments, always with headphones on and a document of translated Arabic, Hebrew, and English beside her. Every pause in a sentence, every breath, was examined. Because in this story, silence spoke volumes. Sometimes, scenes took weeks to finish. Not because of difficulty, but because of emotional gravity. One shot of Basel sitting on a pile of rubble, just sitting, not speaking, was revisited 16 times. Each cut felt wrong until the 17th, where a single sigh was left in. That sigh became the moment. the one that said everything. The editing process also sparked debates among the team. What to include? What to hold back? Should they show more of the court hearings? Should they name every child? Should they include the drone shot of the soldier waving at the camera, smiling? In the end, they chose honesty over completeness. They didn't try to represent everything. They tried to represent what mattered. Their connection as a crew deepened with each challenge. They began to finish each other's sentences. They began to dream the same nightmares. They also began to see one another differently, not just as partners, but as extensions of the story itself. Yuval once said, "Basel didn't just invite me into his world. He changed mine." Basel, for his part, never saw himself as a filmmaker. "I'm just showing you what's happening," he'd say. But that humility was part of the reason the footage resonated. He wasn't interested in angles or aesthetics. He was interested in truth. And when that truth was too heavy, he put the camera down. That discipline, of knowing when not to film, was perhaps the most cinematic choice of all. The final days of production were unlike any traditional wrap. There was no party, no clinking of glasses. Just one final walk through the hills. A last interview. A quiet moment where each of them took a turn saying what the film had given them. Yuval said, "It gave me eyes I didn't know I needed." Rachel said, "It gave me purpose." Hamdan said, "It gave the land a voice." Basel said nothing. He just turned the camera back on. And that, in the end, was what No Other Land was about. Not just the destruction of homes, but the reconstruction of voice. Not just the erasure of villages, but the engraving of memory. Behind the scenes, it wasn't perfect. It was often messy. It was loud. It was painful. But it was real. A group of people, bound by conviction, crafting something beautiful out of brokenness. Filming not from above, but from within. And telling a story that had waited far too long to be heard. There are films that hold your attention, and there are films that hold your breath. No Other Land does the latter. Not because of any cinematic trickery or narrative suspense, but because it whispers truths so profound and so present that to watch it is to feel a slow, unrelenting pressure in the chest. That ache isn't just born from what is shown on screen, but from what lingers beneath it. The film, woven with images of rubble and resistance, survival and silence, is stitched together by themes that run deeper than footage. Themes that are lived, not written. Themes that pulse like a second heartbeat under every frame. The most immediate and inescapable theme is home. What does it mean to have a home? What does it mean to lose one, not once, but repeatedly, to bulldozers and court rulings and orders issued in languages not your own? For Basel Adra and the villagers of Sefer Yatta, home is not a structure. It's not four walls or legal ownership. It is lineage. It is dust clinging to the hem of your grandmother's dress. It is the fig tree you planted with your father, the well dug before you were born, the rock where you once sat for a wedding photo. The film doesn't define home with words. It shows it in the tender gestures of rebuilding, of sweeping the floor even when there are no walls left to contain it. But this idea of home is not static. It is constantly under threat. And so, side by side with the theme of home, No Other Land explores displacement, not as a singular event, but as a state of existence. The people we follow are never allowed to settle. They are caught in an exhausting cycle of return and removal. A tent is built, torn down, and erected again. A home is flattened, and a new one is raised from the rubble. Each act of destruction is met with a quiet, persistent resurrection. And in that cycle lies a powerful message. To exist in defiance of erasure is, in itself, a radical act. Through the dual themes of home and displacement, the land becomes a character, a sacred, brutal, breathing presence that anchors every person and every shot. It's not incidental that the hills of Sefer Yatta are shown not from a distance, but from within, with handheld intimacy and reverent slowness. The land is more than geography, it's identity. And that identity is constantly being contested. Not just by force, but by narrative. This brings us to another of the film's most resonant themes. Truth versus narrative. One of the most quietly devastating elements of the documentary is how it unravels the idea of neutrality. It reveals how truth is often buried beneath bureaucracy, how language becomes a tool of violence when wielded to strip communities of legitimacy. Israeli courts declare the villages illegal. Maps erase names. Soldiers say they are following orders. In response, the filmmakers do not argue. They document. And in doing so, they assert a counter-narrative, not through protest slogans, but through lived reality. This battle between truth and narrative is personified in the relationship between Basel and Yuval. Basel, Palestinian, films from within. Yuval, Israeli, films alongside. Their friendship is not polished. It's raw, tense, and at times fractured. But within that dynamic, the film presents one of its most courageous themes, co-resistance. The idea that allyship is not about saviorism. It's about standing in the mess, in the discomfort, and choosing to stay. Choosing to listen. Choosing to bear witness even when it implicates you. Their relationship also explores the theme of complicity. Yuval does not pretend to be neutral. He wrestles openly and painfully with the privileges he holds, with the blind spots of his upbringing, with the quiet indoctrination of statehood. And through him, the film asks a piercing question. What does it mean to resist a system that made you? But No Other Land doesn't stop at politics. Beneath its political urgency is a deep well of grief. Not the cinematic kind. Not loud or theatrical. The grief here is quieter, harder. It's in the way a mother gathers the pieces of a broken tea set. It's in the silence that follows a demolition. It's in the decision to hang a curtain on a wall that no longer stands. Grief becomes ritual. And like all rituals, it becomes a form of endurance. From grief emerges another theme, memory as resistance. When courts erase names, when maps omit villages, when officials declare homes unrecognized, memory becomes a battleground. And in No Other Land, the camera itself becomes a weapon of memory. Basel films not for art, but for evidence. Every frame is a refusal to forget. Every lingering shot is an archive. The film doesn't just document events, it remembers them. And in doing so, it restores them to the historical record from which they were erased. Symbolism threads itself subtly but powerfully throughout the film. The drone shots, for instance, serve more than visual appeal. They symbolize surveillance, yes, but also perspective. From above, we see the fragility of homes. We see roads cut off. We see the patterns of removal etched into the land. But we also see continuity. The land, though scarred, remains. Then there's the rubble. So often, in Western cinema, destruction is used for shock. But here, rubble becomes a recurring motif of reclamation. It is sifted through, repurposed. Children climb it. Mothers sweep it. It becomes the material of survival. Rubble does not just mark the end of something, it becomes the beginning of something else. Water, too, appears again and again, not in abundance, but in scarcity. Buckets carried long distances. A shared sip during a protest. A broken pipe flooding a floor. Water is not just survival. It is dignity. Its absence is felt viscerally. Its presence is sacred. One of the most haunting symbols is the tent. The tent, by nature, is temporary. A place to pass through. But in No Other Land, tents become symbols of permanence. They are rebuilt in the same spot again and again. They become classrooms, bedrooms, living rooms. A woman gives birth in one. A man dies in another. The tent, once a mark of instability, transforms into a monument of refusal. You can take the house, the film seems to say, but we are not moving. Another layer of symbolism is found in the children. Children appear throughout the film, not as tokens of innocence, but as reminders of continuity. They fly kites, chase goats, build things from scraps. Their presence is a symbol that time has not stopped, that history is still being written, even as others try to erase it. A girl skips over cracked concrete. A boy draws his house on a piece of cardboard. They do not speak in political terms, but their presence says everything. The camera often lingers on these children just a second longer than expected. It invites us to imagine not just what they endure, but who they might become. And in that, we're given one of the film's most delicate themes, the right to imagine a future. It is a right so often denied to the people on screen. Occupation steals more than land, it steals time. It traps families in a loop of the urgent present. But no other land, by showing children, by showing weddings and laughter and rest, insists that even in the shadow of injustice, people dare to dream. This theme echoes in the film's pacing. There are scenes of chaos, raids, protests, court rulings. But there are also long pauses. Scenes where nothing seems to happen. A pot is stirred. A sheep is fed. A man sits in silence. These moments are not filler. They are declarations. That life is not defined solely by what is taken. It is also defined by what is made, quietly, every day, in defiance. In the end, perhaps the most encompassing theme is dignity. Dignity in the face of surveillance. In the face of erasure. In the face of apathy. The people in no other land are not framed as victims. They are shown as whole. Complex. Angry, yes. Exhausted, yes. But also joyful. Also proud. Also deeply, defiantly human. And that is the final message. Humanity is not negotiable. You cannot bulldoze it. You cannot legislate it out of existence. You cannot map it away. No other land is not just about injustice. It is about the people who live through it, who name it, who film it, who refuse to vanish. It is a film built on earth and breath, on memory and presence. And in every theme it explores, every symbol it honors, it offers one resounding truth. As long as there is someone to remember, to record, to rebuild, there is no other land. There are films that declare themselves with a flourish, a sweeping score, a polished tracking shot, a tightly rehearsed opening monologue. And then there are films like No Other Land, which unfold with the quiet insistence of truth. Here, filmmaking is not a performance. It is survival. It is memory. It is resistance. From the very first shot, every visual choice in this documentary whispers something urgent. Every sound, every cut, every frame is soaked in intention, even when it's marked by imperfection. Especially when it's marked by imperfection. This is a film that does not look away. And technically, that's because it cannot afford to. But artistically, it chooses not to. No Other Land was born not in a production office but in the dust and disarray of the South Hebron Hills. Its style emerged organically, born from the limits of the environment and the immediacy of the events being captured. There were no rehearsals, no elaborate rigs, no marks to hit. Instead, there was movement, sudden, chaotic, unfiltered movement, and the filmmakers met that with cameras that were always half-ready, always half-hidden, and always deeply present. One of the most distinctive choices in the film is the handheld camera work. Shaky, intimate, uncomfortably close at times, the footage mirrors the instability of the lives it documents. When Basel Adra films the demolition of his home, the camera trembles not for drama, but because he is trembling. When Yuval Abraham records a protest turning violent, the lens jerks, loses focus, captures feet instead of faces, because there is no time to compose a shot when you're running for safety. Rather than detract from the experience, this erratic movement defines it. It invites the viewer into the moment. You don't feel like you're watching a documentary. You feel like you're in the room, on the hill, behind the camera. The messiness becomes immersive. It erases the boundary between observer and participant. The filmmakers employed a mixture of devices: phones, DSLRs, drones, even borrowed equipment that changed from week to week. The inconsistency of gear produced footage with varied textures and resolutions. Some images are crisp and vivid. Others are grainy and raw. Instead of smoothing this out in post, the team embraced it. That contrast, between clarity and blur, between sound and silence, became a kind of emotional register. It told the viewer, not everything here is neat. Not everything here is safe. Drone footage in particular became a subtle yet vital tool. It was used sparingly, never for spectacle, but for perspective. When the camera rises above a village, revealing the skeletal remains of homes, the full scale of devastation comes into view. It's a God's eye view, but one used to witness, not to dominate. And in many ways, it plays a symbolic role too. From above, we see how political decisions manifest in geography, how court rulings redraw lives in real time. The film's use of sound, or its often deliberate lack thereof, deepens this sense of immersion. There is no musical score in no other land. No swelling orchestras to guide your emotions. Instead, the audio environment is made up of real sound: the crunch of boots on gravel, the clatter of metal, the howl of wind through plastic sheeting. The filmmakers resisted the temptation to manipulate emotional response with music. They let silence do the work. And silence, in this film, is not empty. It is the space where breath catches, where pain lingers, where the echo of a demolition settles into your bones. In interviews and behind-the-scenes talks, the team explained how the sound design was as intuitive as the visuals. Much of the audio was captured on the fly, using whatever was available. Sometimes boom mics, sometimes lavaliers, sometimes the internal mic on a phone. Background noise was not scrubbed. Static was often left in. These imperfections weren't seen as technical flaws but as narrative truth. They told the story of how hard it was to get this story. Editing, too, was a feat of resilience and radical honesty. Rachel Zier, the editor and co-director, worked with hours upon hours of footage. Some of it shot years apart, some with no time codes, no slates, no context beyond a whispered explanation from Basel or Yuval. She built the story not from a script, but from emotion, from memory, from the rhythm of voices. The structure is non-linear. There is no Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. There is a loop, a cycle of demolition and rebuilding, hope and heartbreak, memory and resistance. The film circles back on itself, returning to the same roads, the same hills, the same tent pitched where a house once stood. This repetition is deliberate. It mimics the lived reality of the villagers, and it refuses the comfort of progress. Nothing here is neatly resolved. Montage is used sparingly, but powerfully. One sequence shows a classroom being destroyed. Cut to a child's notebook on the ground. Cut to a teacher salvaging a whiteboard. Cut to a new class forming under a tree. No voiceover. No explanation. Just juxtaposition. The editing lets the viewer draw the connections. And that trust is one of the film's greatest gifts. It assumes the audience is willing to feel, not just understand. The pacing is patient. Scenes are allowed to breathe. A man sitting alone after his home is flattened. A woman making tea in a makeshift kitchen. These moments might seem uneventful in a traditional film. But here they become profound. Because in a world where existence itself is defiance, every quiet moment is an act of rebellion. The cinematographic approach also plays with perspective in subtle ways. The camera is often low, shooting up, placing the viewer in the position of a child or someone trying to see over an obstacle. At other times, the camera sits at eye level, unflinching, demanding that we meet each gaze head-on. When Yuval speaks to the camera, there's no formal setup. No lighting. Just a man trying to say something he can barely find words for. When Basel films his family, there's no separation between subject and filmmaker. We feel the weight he carries, not just the camera, but the responsibility of telling the story right. There are no talking heads, no experts, no infographics, just the land, and the people living on it. That was a conscious decision, one rooted in the film's central philosophy. Let those who live it tell it. In terms of production, No Other Land is a miracle of independent filmmaking. Shot with minimal equipment, almost no budget, and a team that often worked under threat of violence or arrest, the film stands as a testament to what can be accomplished when storytelling is driven not by commerce, but by necessity. There were no production trailers. Editing took place on laptops balanced on plastic tables in refugee camps, in borrowed rooms with flickering Wi-Fi, in silence while gunfire cracked in the distance. At one point, a full day's footage was lost due to a memory card crushed during a military raid. At another, a drone was shot out of the sky. These weren't setbacks. They were expected. And the team adapted. They always adapted. There were no reshoots. No alternate takes. No polishing. And that, somehow, made the film gleam even brighter with truth. And then, against all odds, came the global response. No Other Land premiered at the Berlinale, the Berlin International Film Festival, where it won the Documentary Award. Not because it dazzled with cinematic innovation, but because it dared to speak plainly. And in doing so, it shook people awake. The box office success, modest by blockbuster standards, was nonetheless profound. The film was embraced not just by art-house circles, but by activists, educators, students, and audiences who had never seen their lives reflected on screen. It sold out screenings across Europe and the Middle East. It was streamed and shared and screened in classrooms and community centers, on laptops in refugee camps, on projectors in fields. There was no expensive marketing campaign. Word of mouth carried it. People didn't just watch this film. They shared it, urgently. It spread like something necessary. Like a message smuggled across borders. In terms of numbers, the film didn't chase commercial metrics. But in terms of impact, it broke through. It became more than a documentary. It became an artifact. A mirror. A movement. The techniques used, raw visuals, real-time sound, non-linear editing, immersive pacing, didn't just shape the film's atmosphere. They were the atmosphere. They allowed the viewer not to watch from a distance, but to inhabit the story. No Other Land doesn't impress you with style. It impresses upon you something else entirely. A feeling. A truth. A call to stay, to see, to remember. And in every trembling frame, every silent breath, every unflinching shot, it reminds you. This is not just a film. This is what resistance looks like. They never thought they'd be called a cast. In the world of fiction, that word belongs to actors. People who step into lives that aren't theirs, who recite lines written by someone else under lights sculpted for mood and atmosphere. But in No Other Land, no one is performing. No one is playing a part. There is no script. No line to remember. Just people, real people, facing down the erasure of everything they know, and speaking into the camera not as characters, but as themselves. Still, to talk about the cast of this film is to talk about the living heart of it. Because what draws the audience into No Other Land isn't just the story. It's the people who choose to live it over and over again, with the camera rolling. At the center is Basel Adra.